coming back to self-trust, because it's like plummet into that murkiness of like, what's wrong with me? Like, why aren't I getting it? Why aren't I like showing up to this thing I thought I want, and allowing that thing to change and allowing that path to be like, you rode that wave, like that wave is now done. And there's another wave for you that isn't, continuing down that same track that maybe you were pointed in. And yeah, experiencing that a lot in my life, of like a lot of moments of just like clear runway, and then something starts to feel strange and sticky and like stagnant. And then it's like 180 direction, the 180 like shift into a completely opposite direction, and just like becoming more trusting of the unknown and the discomfort of change, and trusting that the ground's going to meet me no matter where I go.
Hello, and welcome to The Art of Lost and Found, a podcast that explores the creative relationship between our inner and outer worlds. It's a creative exploration through stories, insights, resources, and tools to help you intentionally design your life and work. I'm your host, Brooke Eston, also known as the Creative Amplifier. I'm part strategist, part designer, part coach, and part artist. And I'm dedicated to helping fellow creatives bridge the gaps between those big dreams and practical realities. Today, I am thrilled to bring you Safiya Carol Lavelle. Safiya is a multi-passionate artist, musician, web designer, and the founder of Wildlight Creative. I had the pleasure of getting to know her during the original launch program of my signature 12-week experience, Aligned by Design. Safiya grew up on a small island in British Columbia, Canada, in the loving embrace of a vibrant artist community. She shares what it was like to grow up in such a free-spirited place, and how a traumatic parental divorce and uprooting move with her mother caused her to lose her sense of belonging at the tender age of 6 years old. From finding community to fighting against traditional constraints as an artist, our conversation was so rich and nourishing that we're splitting it into 2 episodes. Join us in this first half as we dive into trusting yourself in the midst of the unknown. Welcome to the Art of Lost and Found, Safiya. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm so grateful to be here, truly.
So you became a student in the flagship program, the beta that I launched of my Aligned by Design 12-week program. And I feel like, and this surfaced a lot in the course, but I feel like you straight up stepped out of my vision board. So in meeting you and working with you and watching you move through your process, from my perspective, feels like just such a gift to know you, to be in this space with you, because it is a vulnerable, raw, work in progress space.
Yeah.
And your generosity and your compassion and your supporting of the other people in the group was really extraordinary.
Yeah, that journey was incredibly nourishing for me. And it showed up also as like a gift in the perfect moment when I had just like left home with my partner and our dogs, and we had been looking for like a home in my kind of hometown community for like a year, and the housing crisis really pushed us to just like step back and ask, where do we want to be and what do we want to create? And like, can we disentangle from everything that's familiar and comfortable and like see how that informs our next steps? So we had cast out on this really big journey driving through the US from BC into Mexico. And one of my intentions was to start really stepping into sharing my work. And I feel like I've been in the muck of discovery and cultivation, and I'm still very much there. And to just be met with like this energy that was just, like you have been on the design path and you have so much experience in that way, which was I was so hungry for that. I was so hungry for somebody who's been in a creative professional role and has gone through the industry and has found, what doesn't feel so nourishing about those worlds, and is finding her own way to cultivate a balanced creative life. And yet you were also in that vulnerability of like, I'm just starting this, like, come meet me and like, let's play in the sandbox and like, let's see what we can create. And so it just felt so safe and so perfectly matched for what I needed. And there was a lot of magic in that alignment, especially because I couldn't afford like a mentor or a teacher. And so to be able to touch into like your first round of this offering was at a price point that I could actually like figure out. And it was just like a huge catapult for me in feeling more comfortable in this like amorphous place of no home and no steady income, and just this discovery of what's next for me. So really grateful for your presence in my life as a teacher and as a friend, and to be, more than just a student to somebody, but like to feel that kinship and that equality and that generosity that feels so mutual and just like so safe to show up with. Yeah.
Thank you. And that also is something that struck me about you, was your bravery. Because in that first email you sent me, you said, this is so resonant and I want to do this, but is there flexibility around payment?
Yeah. Like I had literally no money in my account when I saw that.
Yeah. And I received that and I was like, absolutely. Like, why not? I didn't think about a payment plan. It didn't even cross my mind. I'm like, it's a low ticket offer, it'll be fine. So when you came in, I was like, okay, sure. Like, I feel a connection to this person and I want her to participate. And there felt like there was a cosmic trust there. And I always say this about trust is, if you're willing to trust something, if you're willing to let somebody borrow money, if you're willing to, do a favor and anything like that, then it's really important that you are in the energy of contribution and service, and you're okay with that not coming back to you.
Well, thank you for being in the trust and in the listening of your heart in that, because I got to receive so much from it as well. And that wouldn't have happened if you had stayed in the mind. And like the fear of our financial security can be so alluring, especially with the pressures of the world changing around us. And it's somewhere in there, you reminded me of a quote that is really dear to my heart. It is the role of the artist to make the revolution irresistible. By a woman named Toni Cade Bambara. She was a BIPOC activist and documentary filmmaker. And this, this quality of like, as an artist, like going and trying to create beauty from a standpoint of like, will this pay me? Will people like it? Like those traps of needing some kind of security from outside of ourselves and some kind of assurance that whatever we put into the world is going to like come back and feed us in some way. And to surrender into that trust and into that let go and into that like actual wholehearted generosity, and to like trust in just the I guess it's like the fertility of life that's going to nourish us no matter what, and in ways that we probably couldn't even anticipate. And that's just been it's been a really big inquiry of how to approach art more from that space of like, what feels important to me to share and to give and to say without getting caught in the fear of rejection or getting caught in the fear of it not giving me a paycheck, and to arrive more at this place of like creating beauty for the sake of creating beauty because my heart just wants to do that, and that naturally will ripple out and create the changes that I wish to see in the world, and not from I'm going to convince you to stop polluting the environment, but like I'm going to sing to you about how I love the trees and the forest and the beautiful landscapes that we get to call home. And so that shift, both in like a creative way, but also in like a practical way, has been something I've been really like working with a lot. And I just appreciate the way that you expressed it in regard to this container, and your lessons around that. It's nuanced, beautiful, and a big kind of archetypal lesson, I feel like.
Yeah. So let's explore a little bit more about your relationship with creativity, because you have so many different outlets and expressions, and you have talent and skill in so many of them also. Like, there's some artists that really channel their creativity and their artistry into a more narrow space, but yours is really wide and all encompassing. So I would love to start that story with you before you had any awareness over of other people's expectations or capitalist society or any of these things that we come to understand, but we aren't born into it. So I try to ask people about when they were young, before they had the traumas and the judgments and the stories of all of the shoulds and all of the boxes that they should be contorting themselves into. How did your creativity emerge?
It's a very good question. It's interesting. It feels like tricky to answer because I feel like those shoulds, they go so deep, and I almost feel like we inherit them in a way as we come into this world, and so it's hard to remember a time like distinctly before them for me. But there's been a beauty in dancing with them and like feeling them come in more strongly in moments, and then feeling just like the natural impulse of my spirit to just want to express creatively in any way, shape, or form. And so as a kid, it was like there was less boundaries around that for sure. And it was like I would like need to dance in order for my mom to put me to sleep. Like she would dance me until I was tired. Or, I remember just like hours of sitting in my room listening to music and just drawing for like, I would just entertain myself with a set of colored pencils and a page. And so there was always just this deep medicine and nourishment and like self-soothing through artistry, through movement, through singing, through storytelling, through, whatever creative means possible. And that is like continued to be, creativity feels so broad to me. And I guess as I've grown up, those constraints of like a career path and like how you're monetizing your creativity, like that became more stressful as, I didn't want to limit all of these ways in which I wanted to express. And so creating structure and creating rhythm around that became very challenging.
Can you, to help us drop into that time and that period of your life, can you share a little bit about something in your childhood that felt very formative or important as a catalyst for your creative development? Like what do we need to understand about your childhood and your relationship with creativity to better understand your trajectory?
the first thing, really pivotal moment in my life that comes up. I was 6 and my mom, like I was born on a small island in BC, Canada, very artistic community, potlucks, jams, like there was just always like both my parents they were separated from the time I was 4, but there was always like music and little community gatherings. And my mom would like bring me to there's a community hall, and her and my aunt would run like huge dance events. And so I would be like a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, like sleeping in the back hall while all the adults were partying and coming out at like 2 a.m. to get a snack. And so like I was just immersed in art and community and had these deep ties of belonging and safety. And when I was 6, my mom decided to pursue this lifelong dream of becoming a midwife. And as she was applying for school, the options she was given was either we move to somewhere where they desperately needed nurses and we could be there for 2 years in a more intensive, faster learning kind of format, or we could move somewhere else in Canada for 4 years. And so she chose anywhere in the world where they desperately needed nurses, shorter time frame, and she took me with her and we drove to El Paso, Texas, on the border of Mexico. And that was such a stark contrast for me, living in this like kind of hippie community, VC, like lots of families all caring for each other's kids, to suddenly like my mom and I being alone in the US and being just like in such a different cultural context. And so that was incredibly challenging for me, and was like, I feel like a really big wound of like fracturing my sense of belonging. And I really struggled there. So at one point my mom sent me home, and I was going to spend a year living now with my dad back on Salt Spring. So that whole transition was very, very challenging. And coming back home, my dad now had a new son. And so there was just like so much change and movement at a very kind of crucial developmental time. And yeah, and so I think my mom's friend really noticed like Safiya's back, she's really struggling. She doesn't really have connection to community in the way that she once did. And she got this program that was offering music lessons to kids for low-income families to come to my house and offer my family this opportunity for me to be enrolled in any kind of music lesson I wanted. So I remember them showing up to our house and being like, hi, like, what do you want to do? Like, you could do anything, like, just tell us. And I had said I wanted to sing, and they didn't have any vocal coaches available. So the next thing that I thought of was the violin. And there was like the preschool I went to a Waldorf, amazing Waldorf preschool, like hands in the dirt, learning to sew and cook and grow food and around horses. And there was a violin teacher on the property. So as a young one, we would like run up to the window and watch all the students playing. And it just like imprinted me with this like, wow, what a special instrument and what a beautiful space. And so I chose the violin, and I ended up getting to study with that teacher. And she was like the best teacher in that area, was like fully booked out for months. And like somehow I got in at a time when that was quite rare. And I started 10 years of being classically trained with her. And so that was huge. It fundamentally altered, I think, my trajectory at that time. And it gave me a place for my passion, for my emotion, for my pain, for my joy, for like my mind's development, for a sense of focus and a sense of belonging. Because then there was community around that music world that suddenly I had a doorway into, and learning, really practical skills in terms of being a musician, of like sight reading and like ear training, and like being able to play anything I heard by ear, and being able to just jam with any kind of musician. And yeah, so that was really, really fundamental. And alongside that, my family, just before I had started like classically training, I was enrolled, I was in a program, it was all set to go for the fall. They got me into a fiddle camp for the summer to just like, okay, well, you're going to start playing violin. Like, why don't we start with like something small, like 5 days, like see how it feels. And that camp became like my favorite childhood memory every year was like every summer going to be immersed in world fiddle. There was teachers from everywhere, and we would just create these incredibly elaborate performances, all ages, like from 5-year-old to like an 80-year-old, playing viola, violin, cello, penny whistle, dance, art. Like it became just this hub of creative expression and community, and like tethered me back into a sense of belonging in a really big way. So those two, and the violin as just like a companion and a life ally, really, yeah, really altered my sense of expression and belonging. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
at that point, I'm curious what your relationship was like with your parents at that
Mm.
time. Because I can imagine the trauma of that experience, and it's easy to just turn that trauma against the person that you think inflicted it on you.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, in that dynamic, how did your relationship with your parents develop, and the different iterations that it must have gone through?
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, really challenging. Very challenging. Yeah. Like, of course, lots of beautiful moments and lots of love and whatnot, but like ultimately planted, I think, a big seed of distrust in both of them. And yeah, it like started, as I got older and more into like teenage years as well, it became just like more and more challenging. And we had like quite, just like really big breakdowns. And music gave me a doorway to like be independent. Like I would hitchhike all over Salt Spring with my violin across my back and like get let into parties or events, or like I just could basically go anywhere with music as my ticket, because I could jam with anyone and just like go wherever I wanted. And so like, and now as an adult, like holding so much compassion for both my parents and like how difficult that was for them, and their fear of like, just seeing me around mostly adults and like being in this ability to be hyper independent in a way that they couldn't fully control, and not having like the greatest trust and communication with them. And so it was very hard for many years, and I'm really grateful to say now I have really beautiful friendships with both of my parents, and we've mended a lot and moved through a lot. And part of that was through traveling with my dad to India in my kind of later teens, and going like, finding a really beautiful spiritual teacher together. And um, we've gone through a lot, and I'm really, really grateful for where we have landed now. There's deep respect and a lot of compassion for that time, because it was hard on everyone.
Yeah. I can relate to that. So much of your story I see myself in. It's a different context, but I also, as a young child, was moved into a completely different culture where my parents were also trying to adjust and orient. And in my case, I went from Northern California to Bangkok, Thailand.
Wow.
And my parents had never even been out of America before when we made that move. And they couldn't give me what I thought that I needed at that time. And I experienced that as a betrayal, that my response to that was hyper independence, rebellion, and arrogance. Like I thought I knew better than them.
Yeah.
And the relationships in my teenage years with them were really challenging. And it took a long time for me to developmentally get to a place where I could even access any kind of compassion, let alone empathy for them.
Yeah.
Now I do, and I have a completely different relationship, and I understand them and they understand me, and we were just trying to love and protect each other.
Yeah.
But the way that we went about that was human and flawed. And, you know, there's often a massive gap between intention and impact. And part of that is, you know, just like the luck of the draw. And part of that is awareness and maturity and resilience and empathy and all of these other things that help to close that gap. And yeah, part of the reason I asked you about that is because I feel like that's something that so many of us can relate to, not in the details, but in the themes, right? What it feels like to be abandoned or disconnected or uprooted or wronged, or, you know, any of these other things that we all get to experience mostly in our childhood and adolescence. And, you know, part of what I really appreciate about you is your ability to transform that energy into something that is positive and creative and expansive, instead of punishing and restrictive and like stops the energy from flowing, right? Instead of learning how to work with that and make adjustments and find another way. Like creativity, yes, is dancing and playing music and singing and painting and drawing, but creativity at its root is novelty and problem solving and experimentation and wayfinding and all of these things that require presence and trust and accountability and vulnerability and connection. And those are the ingredients that are needed for that transformation to happen.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you then get into developing your voice?
Ooh, yeah. Yeah. So I was deep in classical orchestral violin with the once-a-year fiddle camp that would like break me out of my shell. And I was always in choirs, and I really loved just like, yeah, I loved singing. I like memorized every song on the radio and I taught myself to harmonize by just like singing with them. And so put on like 94.5 or some like pop, you know, whatever. And like find my way into harmonizing, because the same songs would always be repeating. That practice, I think really did a lot for me that I like didn't even realize until I started like actually investigating my voice in a more formal way. And then I was like, whoa, I have an ear for harmony and I know how to like move around in this space. And then also violin, I think, of course, like really sharpened my sense of intonation and my sense of rhythm, and did so much for like the technicality of just like my musical ear. And so in high school, amazing teacher, like one of those teachers that just also like alters the trajectory of your life. He was so fun and so creative and so intense. And he was
I
one
like
of those
him already.
like, yeah, you either like love him or hate him. And he either like you're his favorite student and he's going to give you everything, or you're kind of not. And I was really lucky to be one that just like instantly got along with him. And he gave me so much support in developing not only my voice, but I started learning guitar. I started exploring performance. And so the three main courses I was doing through high school was an advanced choir, and we would show up at like 7 a.m. before school, sing for an hour to an hour and a half, and then go to our day. And we then also had a composition class. And then I started moving into, there's kind of like a an art school within the high school program on the island I grew up on. And so it's called Gulf Island School of Performing Arts. It's like a much more focused, intensive program with music, theater, and dance being the three main kind of corridors. And so I basically just like lived in the music room, spent all my lunch breaks like in a little room practicing and exploring. And like an example of a day in that class would be, we all arrive and he's like, sit down, grab a pencil, grab paper. What do you feel when I say this? As soon as I give you this prompt, I just want you to write everything and anything that comes to mind, and like focus on your senses, focus on imagery, like what comes up in your system when I say you break through the ice on a river that was frozen, and then you realize the cold is starting to bite to your bones, and you reach your hand up to try and escape, and you can see the light, and you can see your partner, your beloved, is up there, and your hand touches the ice and you can't break through. Go.
Wow.
And like just getting us in this space of like, what are all of the feeling possibilities? What are all the senses? What are all these possibilities of life in our feeling capacity? And then it's like at some random interval he'd say, okay, stop, like can't put another word, and then he'd give us another prompt and say go, and then he'd be like, okay, you two, like read what you did. Okay, I like those words, you take those 3 words, you go write a song, you have 20 minutes. Wow. Do it in this key with these instruments, go. And then we be sent off into our little groups to take whatever free writing prompt was used to bring up an energy, and then turn that into some creative story and some creative piece of music, and then bring that to the group, and then play it for this class, and then have everybody dissect it and say, well, the rhythm could have been better here. What if you added a chorus? What if you changed these lyrics? What if you added a drummer? Like, okay, you go, you're the drummer now, like jump in. And so this very fast-paced, like explorative space to refine songwriting skills, to refine my vocal expression, to refine just like my musicality in general and my sense of creative freedom. And so I loved that program. I thrived in that program. And the more kind of focused School of Performance Art, we would do that within the context of creating a play and some kind of immersive experience. And then we'd be thrown into like stage manager role, like in a 200-person auditorium with like lights and sound and like props, and like figure it out. Like, you guys are in charge, like make this happen. And so he really pushed us, and he was intense in that way, but like so generous, because we got way more experience than any kind of arts program in high school that I know of. And that set me up in so many ways that that gave me confidence. It actually pulled me out of my classical studies, because I was just more interested in breaking the molds of like, reading old, beautiful, complex music sheets that are dictated exactly how loud and soft and what feeling and what emphasis you put on each note, to like exploring what wanted to come through me, and like breaking through these structures of like, play this, to like, what do you have inside you that wants to come through? And so that's how I started exploring my voice more intensively, and started songwriting and playing guitar, so that I could, explore my voice more directly in terms of like singer-songwriter. Like, I can sing by myself and have rhythm and have a chord progression and have something else to play with. And then he gave me a looping pedal, and that really like took it to the next level of being able to lay guitar foundation, and then percussion, and then violin, and then vocals, and like create a world on my own sonically. So
I love that. What a beautiful opportunity that is. I mean, I imagine like where my mind immediately goes is just how different the world would be if that was part of how we were educated.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's both the rules and the structure, and the metaphor that my mind goes to is that's the scaffolding.
Yes.
That's not the whole thing. That's just the scaffolding. But you need that. Otherwise, your stuff isn't really going to stick, and it's going to be weak, and it won't have structural integrity.
Yeah.
Right. And that's dangerous. And that really limits your ability to create if you don't have scaffolding.
Something he would frequently say is know the rules so you can break them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story was his other one.
I feel like that one's maybe more contextual.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's exactly it. And again, I can relate to that because I was classically trained as a ballerina for 10 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's very technical. It's very restricted. Everything about it is restrictive. Yeah. Right? The movement, your fingers, your leotard, your point shoes, your posture, like everything. It wasn't expansive.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing in your story, I can very much relate to from that perspective. But also it helps me understand you more and the way that you move through the world. And as I said in the introduction, like for you to be such a good student, right? Like grounded in, I did my homework, I moved through the courses, like I did those things, but then your shares and your expression were so expansive. So that intrigued me about you, that you could have both that really fluid, flowing, prolific, creative side, but also structure and timing. Like you were consistently 1 to 2 minutes early every single call. And I know because Victoria and I were in the room and I'm like, oh, okay, people are starting to arrive. Safiya's here. Like, let's wrap this up and open the room.
What got me out of classical violin is I started consistently showing up late, consistently not practicing at all, like just totally lost any kind of focus in terms of doing my homework. And like that, that arising of like my own like inner resistance, and to listen to that and to see like, it felt so joyful to show up to that course. And it really showed me a lot of myself and like a deeper trust and like, oh, I can show up when it's something that feels right for where I'm at. And just like having compassion for, the spectrum of that, because it's like, I could go both ways, but it really depends on like, does this actually feel nourishing for my being at this time?
The way that I'm hearing you talk about your journey reminds me of so many conversations I've had with creatives where they get into a place of self-judgment. What's wrong with me? Why am I always late? Why can't I make a decision? Why am I not good at this? Am I just lazy? And it's like, no. Yeah. How can you be saying, am I lazy when you spend, when you're head down, writing a song, making something, doing all these things? Like that's not laziness. That's disinterest. So I think there's something really important that we're touching on here around understanding yourself and really observing how and where your energy is moving.
Yeah.
Before you place any kind of judgment. Because if you're in the muck and you're hating on yourself and you're believing that there's something wrong with you, like nothing's going to come through. I don't want to go there. Like who would want to go there? Certainly not the muse, right? But in creating that more open and expansive self-narrative, and by having community to help ground you in that and support you and remind you, like that's such, to use your wording, like that's such a fertile space to be in. And I think you're evidence of what can blossom when you have that type of perspective and environment.
Thanks. Yeah. And like coming back to self-trust, because it's like plummet into that murkiness of like, what's wrong with me? Like, why aren't I getting it? Why aren't I like showing up to this thing I thought I want, and allowing that thing to change, and allowing that path to be like, you rode that wave, like that wave is now done. And there's another wave for you that isn't, continuing down that same track that maybe you were pointed in. And experiencing that a lot in my life, of like a lot of moments of just like clear runway, and then something starts to feel strange and sticky and like stagnant. And then it's like 180 direction, the 180 like shift into a completely opposite direction, and just like becoming more trusting of the unknown and the discomfort of change, and trusting that there's going to be some, like, the ground's going to meet me no matter where I go. And if I'm listening to what actually lights up my heart, there's a greater chance that I'm going to be supported and nurtured and like met in my needs when I follow that, even if it like kind of feels like jumping off a cliff. Yeah.
That immediately, the image that comes to my mind is like skydiving or base jumping or something like that, where people set themselves up for success, right? They pack their parachutes, they train, they make sure that there's other people around them. Like, you don't go base jumping alone, like you create the scaffolding and the structure, and you control the things that are controllable. And then you surrender to that experience. And people who go up in those planes are absolutely terrified. And then when they land and they stand up, they're invigorated. Like they're so activated. There's so much life just flowing through when you take that leap of faith. But it's not the jump that is reckless and dangerous. It's the context and the level of trust that you have, both in yourself and the skills and abilities that you've developed. So learning how to navigate both the scaffolding and the flow, the structure and the creative expansion is, I think, the creative journey that so many of us find ourselves on.
Yeah, beautiful.
My conversation with Safiya does not end here. Tune in to our next episode for the second half of our conversation, where we talk about strategies for building the structure that allow for creative expansion across your whole life, including your business. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Art of Lost and Found podcast. I hope that you are feeling inspired and empowered to go forth and explore your curiosity and creativity. As always, if you want any more information about any of our guests or the show notes or anything we discussed on today's episode, you can head over to www.brookeeston.com/podcast. Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.